I want to start by asking you two questions. The first question is, when was the last time the government did something that really bothered you, or failed to do something you thought was really important? Usually that gets quite a response. You can go on for a while. But the second question is, what did you do about it? And this is a talk about doing something about it. In particular, it's probably more about disconnections than connections, in that I'm going to make the case that our political middle, the pragmatic moderates, are no longer represented as well as they should by the political system, and most important, lay out a plan for what we might be able to do about it. That plan, by the way, is going to draw on innovation, which is what TED is about. We think of innovation in medicine, we think of innovation in technology and business. We don't think about political innovation. But I was out in Silicon Valley last week, and I opened up a meeting by saying, let me describe an industry with two incumbent firms, both of which are 100 years old, at least. The second firm, the younger one, was created as a byproduct of disagreements over slavery, not the internet, not electricity. And we now know that their combined customers, of those folks, 85% are displeased with the service they're getting. Do you think we could do better? Do you think there's room for a new entrant? And of course, in Silicon Valley, they just start throwing money at you. And my answer is, all I've described is the American political process, in which the two parties no longer speak to the folks in the middle who really want to solve a lot of the problems that need to be addressed. So how are we going to do that? I believe that the system has three big problems. Number one is we've got policy issues that are unaddressed. I am a public policy person first and foremost. I teach at Dartmouth College. I was up giving a midterm yesterday. And when I run across the range of issues that we come in class, they are things like entitlement spending, the dangerous American debt, the problems with climate change, our underinvestment in K through 12 education, and so on. I never make the case with my students, and I certainly won't make the case with you, that there are right answers about these things. I will make the case that there are a range of things we could and should be doing, all of which are better than doing nothing. And nothing is what we're doing now. I would also make the case that each one of these things is better dealt with right now than next week, next year, or certainly 10 years from now. It's also the case that the two parties I described, the two incumbent firms, are old and insipid. They no longer make intellectual sense. So you may be at home in one party or the other, but you have to sit back and wonder whether maybe we could take the best of each party and discard some of the things that we know. Even if we're in that party or historically have been, they just don't make that much sense. What if we took the best of the Republicans? We like the respect for wealth creation. We like the fact that there's a skepticism of government. It can't solve every problem. We like the respect for personal responsibility and the role of families. But do we really have to pretend that climate change isn't happening? Do we really have to couple that fiscal responsibility with views on social issues that are out of step with a lot of people? Well, let's look at the Democrats. I would argue the Democrats have their heart in the right place. Somebody's got to stand for poor and working people. They've done it historically extremely well. Much of our social progress has been driven by the Democrats. I think they're right, if somewhat ineffective, on environmental issues. But I can also tell you, as someone who's married to a public school teacher, and a public school teacher who, by the way, ran a software company for the first part of her career, so has a different view on how things work, that the Democrats are way too cozy with the teachers' unions. And it's not possible to say that you really stand for poor and minority children if you also are so closely allied to the forces that at every turn foil a lot of the things that are really important for making schools better for those kids. I think the Democrats are in denial on our fiscal situation. So why can't we have both? And the last piece is, regardless of what you think about the two parties, it's certainly true that they're not getting the job done. So what about doing something different? And in particular, let's draw on one issue where everything I've just said kind of comes to a head. Not only would I argue that the U.S. debt is dangerous, the thing that's striking is every time we revisit what's going on, it gets slightly worse. we tried to do something about it. Most of you will remember the Simpson-Bowles Deficit Reduction Commission. Erskine Bowles was a Democrat from the Clinton administration. Alan Simpson, a well-respected Republican senator. They came up with, to most economists, was a really serious step towards dealing with our fiscal situation. I remember in December of 2010 looking at the recommendations that came out of that commission. They were politically unpopular, but they were all a step in the right direction. There was an increase in the gas tax. People don't like paying more in gas tax, but that's where some revenues have to come from. They raised the retirement age for Social Security, which is an important step towards making that system solvent, and so on. I went that January to the American Economics Association, where there was a panel of economists that stretched across the political spectrum. And the last question for the panel was Simpson-Bowles, up or down? In other words, if you had to vote yes or no on the recommendations, would you do it or not? And across the panel, which included people who'd worked for George W. Bush, for Al Gore, for the European Central Bank, the panel said yes, 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 yes. So what happened? Well, Paul Ryan, who was the Republican go-to guy on fiscal issues, voted no. And there's no doubt in my mind that if he'd voted yes, he would have brought some Republicans along. But it's also true that President Obama left that report to lie there and never got behind it. So the two people who could have made the most difference in dealing with a problem that is certainly at the heart of what we have to deal with as a country didn't step up. And rather than blame the people, I want to go back to where I began, which is the structural problem. Both of those folks are beholden to parties that have made promises to their most extreme members that are incompatible with solving the problem. Namely, the Republicans have promised not to raise revenues to the base, and the Democrats have made promises not to change entitlement programs. And if you make those promises, you can't support what Simpson and Bowles came up with. Now, how unpopular is Congress? Well, you probably know. So there have been a series of polls, head-to-head competition. You have to choose one or the other. And this one, head lice wins decisively. As a parent who's dealt with this, I know head lice is no great shakes either, right? Root canal, there's another winner over Congress. Colonoscopy, there's fun for you, right? Colonoscopy also beats Congress. So by and large, they're not getting the job done. So what are we going to do instead? The first thing to recognize is I've described a polarized system, but that's not where America is. By many indications, there is a vibrant, pragmatic middle who wants something different. And we see it all over the place. We see it in the numbers, not only with people identifying increasingly as independent or moderate, and those terms mean a lot of different things to different people, but what's important is they are leaving the two parties. You see the number of unaffiliated people going up. You see affiliation with the two traditional parties going down. Gallup asked a question this year after the shutdown. 60% of Americans said that the country needed a major new third political party. That is, by the way, bigger than the number of independents. So that's some Republicans and Democrats also saying that the current system wasn't getting it done. NBC Esquire had a different approach whereby they asked people about their views on issues rather than how they identify. And when the answers to the issues came back, 51% of Americans who responded to their questions could be broadly construed as small c centrists. They concluded that this idea that there is no political middle between the extremes is simply wrong. Now, what would the best of both parties look like? If you had to do a bumper sticker, it would start with two things: fiscal responsibility and environmental responsibility. The curious thing about that, it's only 4 words, and responsibility is in there twice, so it's really 3 words, right? That eliminates both major political parties. Right? 4 words, 3 if you're right. I mean, and it's just a bumper sticker, right? A lot of people can get behind those things because they belong together. If you are fiscally responsible, it's not about living better today at the expense of your children tomorrow. I would argue environmental responsibility belongs right there with it, which is that's also about not living overly well today at the expense of the next generation. Social tolerance brings together the liberal left and the libertarian right in the idea that, you know what, let's, to the extent we can, just keep government out of our private lives. A lot of people find that completely compatible with the other two tenets. And last, let's pledge economic opportunity for every generation of Americans born in this country and people who arrive in this country. Neither political party does that particularly well right now. Income inequality will be the defining issue of our generation. We need to invest in early childhood education, better K through 12 education, access to college, things that give everybody a shot. Now, how do you get this done? You're probably thinking at this point, all right, the Bull and Moose Party, Ralph Nader, Ross Perot, you can pick your loser third-party movement, which is why the presidency is a non-starter. The Electoral College makes any third-party shot at the presidency a fool's errand. You're not going to get a majority of the Electoral College, and if you get a lot of them, it goes to the House, if you remember your civics, and there are no centrist votes in the House. So forget the presidency. I think you also have to forget the House of Representatives, which is hopelessly gerrymandered at this point, overly partisan, and it would take too many seats to really make a difference. But the U.S. Senate is the place where a centrist movement, where pragmatic people could come together and make a huge difference. In this country right now, there are 22 states that have a Republican senator and a Democratic senator, or a senator from one party and a governor of the other. What that means, by definition, is that the people in the middle are swinging those elections both one way or the other, so that the centrists have hold. Why can't we leverage those states and run for the U.S. Senate? Imagine a Senate race, which can't be gerrymandered because the state is the district, in which you ran a moderate, middle-of-the-road candidate from day one, thinking about the general election. If it's an open seat, the two parties have to run in their primaries, and the Republicans say the things you have to say in a Republican primary, you know, more guns for all school children, and so, you know, and the Democrats are saying, you know, they say what they have to say, which is, you know, Social Security, the retirement age needs to come down to 48, and, you know, and then they win their respective primaries. They rush back to the middle, and they're going to do the Etch-a-Sketch, which is what Mitt Romney has left with us forever, which is you kind of roll back all the crazy things you had to say in the primary, expecting that there's a vacuum in the middle. But in this case, there's no vacuum because we've got the centrist candidate who's been there from the beginning. And if you go back to your civics again, there is no runoff in U.S. Senate seats. You need 34% of the vote in a three-way race. Well, in these states, and perhaps some others, centrists could get 34% of the vote in a three-way race. And let's roll that up. What if you were to do that 4 or 5 times? Really 4, because Angus King's already an independent from Maine in the Senate. Give him 4 playmates, and you could have 5 independents. What would that do? Well, to begin with, imagine a Senate that's 47, 5, 48. At that point, your 5 are the power brokers. If you think about the Supreme Court and all the important 5-4 decisions, it's not Antonin Scalia who matters. It's not Elena Kagan. It's Anthony Kennedy. Well, these 5 senators would be the Anthony Kennedy of the Senate. They are the power brokers. But it's bigger than that, because their whole attitude has to be different than the way politics works right now. So they're sitting in the middle. Figuratively and literally, they can turn to the Republicans and say, you know what? If you're serious about corporate tax reform, as everybody should be, you got our 5 votes. They can turn to the Democrats and say, if you're serious about putting on a price on carbon, as most economists think we ought to do, here are our 5 votes. If there are only 5 of you, it's like being the smallest guy in the playground. You can't go around poking everybody in the eye. Instead, you're constantly looking for allies. The last thing is, this is where the ideas can come from. You've been elected to solve problems and to compromise on important issues. So the centrists can float ideas that the two parties can't, because they're politically beholden to the most partisan members. The great news, it's already happening, just not in this country. Well, to start, in Israel, last year, the Yesh Atid party, the centrist party as it's translated, because there was a reaction to a hyper-partisan political environment, won 19 out of 120 seats in the Knesset. That party was 1 year old. And they immediately became the power broker in that government. Is it easier to do in a parliament system? Yes, it is. On the other hand, 1 year. When people are fed up and you offer them an alternative, and there is this nascent political middle looking for a place to go, things like this can happen. So where would we begin in the United States? In 2014, this year, this election cycle, Larry Pressler will be running for the Senate in South Dakota. Why is that relevant? Larry Pressler is a former Republican senator from South Dakota. He left the Senate, Rhodes Scholar, highly qualified guy. He's now coming back. He's left the Republican Party because he doesn't like the direction that the party's gone. He's running as an independent who is fiscally conservative and socially moderate. And that could be independent number 2. There are 500,000 registered voters in South Dakota. It's a tiny place. If you get other people in the country interested in this outcome, you can say, look, this is your Senate too. The fact he's from South Dakota has relatively little bearing on the fact that he will be one of 100. But more important, 2 of those independent voices. The most likely winner in that race is the current governor, who is a Tea Party Republican. So if you go to Democrats in places like New York and California and say, you know what, you might not elect Larry Pressler in New York or California, but he's terrific for you from South Dakota. And Democrats get that. You can go to Republicans and you can say, you may not like the direction that your party is going. So Larry Pressler represents most of your important Republican values, and you can ditch the stuff that you don't like. It's a winner for both parties. More important, you get that independent voice that moves us one step closer to having 5 independent voices in the Senate, which moves us one step closer to empowering or re-empowering the political middle. So let me finish with 3 possibilities. One is I'm wrong on the policy and everything's okay. And then we're just going in the right direction. And you can think that, and if you do think that, I want whatever medicine you're taking, because I would feel much better. Number 2 is this is a strategy that I've outlined that's not a bad way in relatively short order. Not easy by any means, but to make a difference given the U.S. political system. And number 3 is that there's a better option out there. There's a better way to deal with these long-term issues. And if that's the case, I want to know what it is, because I'll do that. Let me finish by saying this is a relatively privileged group. It's a highly educated group. It's an altruistic and civic-minded group. And if the people here don't engage in the process to redirect things in a way that solves these serious problems, then who will? Thank you very much.